The house had a way of settling into silence after midnight. Not the peaceful kind, but the kind that made every sound feel louder than it should be. The hum of the ceiling fan. The distant bark of a stray dog outside. The faint creak of wood adjusting to the cold night air. I stood by my bedroom window, staring at the street lights bleeding orange into the darkness, trying to convince myself that tonight was no different from any other night. It should have been routine. My partner was away on another late shift, something that had become increasingly common. The house felt emptier these days, stretched thin by absence and unspoken conversations. I told myself I enjoyed the quiet, that the solitude gave me space to breathe. But my chest felt tight. Maybe it was the weather. A heavy stillness hung in the air, thick and suffocating, like the house itself was holding its breath. Or maybe it was the knowledge that someone else was still awake, moving somewhere down the hallway. He had moved in months ago. An adult. Family by circumstance, not blood. Still close enough to make everything complicated. We rarely spoke beyond polite exchanges. A nod in the kitchen. Brief eye contact that lingered a second too long. Silence that said more than words ever could. I tried not to think about him. Tried not to notice how his presence shifted the energy of the house. How rooms felt smaller when he was nearby, how my thoughts grew louder when I heard his footsteps. I told myself it was just discomfort. Adjustment. Nothing more. That's what I told myself. I turned away from the window and reached for a fresh shirt, my movements slow, distracted. The mirror caught my reflection, tired eyes, tension in my jaw, someone I barely recognized anymore. Then I heard it, a sound, soft, hesitant. Footsteps stopping just outside my door. My hand froze mid-motion. I listened. The hallway light cast a thin line beneath the door, brighter than it should have been. Had he been standing there long? Or had he just arrived, unsure whether to knock or turn back? My heart started to race, and I hated myself for noticing. For wondering. For not immediately telling him to leave. The silence stretched. Each second felt deliberate, heavy. I thought about all the things left unsaid in this house. All the boundaries assumed but never spoken aloud. How easily lines blur when loneliness mixes with proximity. I swallowed hard. This was nothing, I told myself. Just a misunderstanding. A coincidence. And yet, my pulse refused to slow. The door didn't open, but it didn't feel closed either. And in that moment, standing alone in my room with my thoughts spiraling, one unsettling question took hold. What would happen if that door did open? If you want, I can. Continue with rising action while keeping it non-explicit. Rewrite this with a different relationship dynamic, e.g., adult housemate, neighbor, friend. Adjust tone to be more psychological thriller or more emotional drama. Just tell me how you want to proceed. The next morning arrived quietly, as if the night hadn't happened at all. Sunlight filtered through the kitchen window, catching dust in the air, turning it into something almost peaceful. The kettle whistled softly on the stove. I stood there longer than necessary, pretending I needed more time before pouring the water, pretending that my thoughts weren't still circling back to that moment outside my door. Nothing had happened. That was the problem. He was already seated at the table when I turned around, scrolling on his phone, one leg hooked casually around the chair. He looked relaxed, too relaxed, like the weight I carried alone didn't exist for him. Morning, he said without looking up. Morning, I replied, my voice steadier than I felt. Routine. That's what this was supposed to be. But when he finally glanced up, our eyes locked just a second longer than necessary. Something unspoken passed between us. Not recognition, not guilt, curiosity. I looked away first. The house settled into its usual rhythm over the next few days, but something had shifted beneath the surface. Conversations were still polite, measured. The walls still stood where they always had. And yet, every shared space felt charged, like static waiting for contact. I became hyper-aware of him. The sound of his footsteps moving from room to room. The way he paused when passing me in the hallway, just long enough to make me notice. The way he avoided sitting too close, as if distance itself was a test of control. I told myself I was imagining it. Loneliness does that. It fills silence with meaning. My partner's absence stretched longer than expected. One late night turned into several. Messages grew shorter. Calls were postponed, then missed entirely. The bed felt colder. The house, bigger. Too big. One evening, the power flickered during a storm. Rain hammered the roof with relentless force, wind rattling the windows like impatient fingers. I lit a few candles, their flames bending and dancing with every draft. He emerged from his room, drawn by the dim light. "Power out?" he asked. "Looks like it." He nodded, hovering awkwardly, unsure whether to stay or retreat. The storm roared louder, thunder shaking the walls. The silence between us felt heavier than the noise outside. "You okay?" he asked finally. The question caught me off guard. I hesitated. "Yeah, just tired." It wasn't a lie, just not the whole truth. We sat on opposite ends of the couch, the space between us deliberate. Candlelight softened the room, casting long shadows that made everything feel unreal, like we were suspended outside of time. Thunder cracked overhead. He flinched, then laughed quietly at himself. "I've always hated storms," he admitted. I looked at him then, really looked at him. The guarded posture, the tension in his shoulders, the way his fingers fidgeted when he thought no one was watching. "You don't seem like the type," I said. "People think they know me," he replied. "They usually don't." Something in his tone lingered. I wanted to ask more, to understand what he meant. But some instincts are self-preserving. I stayed quiet. The storm dragged on. The power didn't return. At some point, he stood. "I'm going to check the breaker. Just in case." I watched him disappear down the hallway, my thoughts spiraling in his absence. Why did his presence feel so grounding and so dangerous at the same time? The lights flickered back on minutes later. When he returned, there was a faint smile on his face, small, almost proud. "Fixed it," he said. "Thanks." Another pause. Then, softly, "About last night." My heart skipped. "Yes." He hesitated, clearly choosing his words. I didn't mean to make things awkward. My pulse thundered in my ears. "You didn't." That wasn't entirely true either. His eyes searched my face, like he was looking for permission to say something more. To cross a line neither of us had named. But instead, he nodded and stepped back. "Good night," he said. "Good night." I lay awake long after, replaying every word, every look. Wondering why restraint felt heavier than indulgence. Over the following weeks, small moments accumulated. Shared laughter over a burned meal. A late-night conversation that drifted into silence without resolution. Accidental brushes of hands that sent heat racing through my chest. Each moment innocent on its own. Together, they formed something dangerous. I began to notice how carefully he avoided mentioning my partner. How his gaze lingered when he thought I wasn't paying attention. How quickly he withdrew afterward, like he was afraid of himself. And I wasn't any better. I caught my reflection one evening, standing too close to him in the kitchen, listening too intently to his voice. I barely recognized the person staring back at me. This wasn't who I was. Or was it? One night, I returned home earlier than expected. The house was dark except for a light under his door. Voices drifted faintly. He was on a call, tone low, strained. "I can't do this anymore," he said. I stopped in the hallway. "You don't understand," he continued. "It's complicated." A pause. "No. It's not like that." He went quiet suddenly. The door opened. We froze, facing each other in the narrow hallway. Surprise flickered across his face, quickly masked by something more guarded. "I didn't know you were home," he said. "Neither did I replied, instantly regretting how that sounded. An uncomfortable silence followed. "Everything okay?" I asked. He exhaled slowly. "Yeah. Just life." I nodded. That word again. Life. Always the excuse for things we don't want to explain. He stepped aside to let me pass, but the hallway felt too tight. Too intimate. My arm brushed his shoulder, and this time neither of us moved away immediately. The contact lasted a heartbeat. Then another. I pulled back first, breath shallow. "Good night," I said quickly. "Good night," he echoed, voice rougher than before. Behind my closed door, I leaned against the wood, heart racing, mind screaming warnings I was no longer sure I wanted to hear. Lines had been drawn, but they were fading. And I couldn't shake the feeling that something inevitable was approaching, something neither of us was fully prepared to face. The question wasn't if things would change. It was how far they would go before one of us stopped it. It happened on a night that felt too ordinary to matter. No storm, no warning, just a quiet house and a clock ticking louder than it should have. I had been sitting in the living room, lights dimmed, pretending to read while my thoughts drifted in restless circles. My partner still hadn't come home. No message, no explanation. The absence felt deliberate now, like a door slowly closing without asking whether I was ready. I heard him before I saw him. Bare footsteps on the tile. A pause. Then he stepped into the room. "Did you eat?" he asked. I shook my head. "Didn't feel like it." He nodded, moving to the kitchen, the familiar distance between us shrinking without either of us acknowledging it. The refrigerator light spilled into the hallway, casting his shadow long and distorted across the wall. I watched it move, watched myself not look away. When he returned, he held 2 glasses. Water. Nothing dramatic. He handed one to me, our fingers brushing, just barely. The contact sent a sharp awareness through my chest, like I'd been cut open. "Thanks," I said, my voice quieter than intended. He sat across from me. Too close. Close enough that I could see the tension in his jaw, the way his shoulders refused to relax. We didn't speak for a while. Silence can be louder than words when it's loaded with things you're both avoiding. "Are you mad at me?" he asked suddenly. The question caught me off guard. "Why would I be?" He shrugged. "You've been distant." I almost laughed at the irony. "I could say the same about you," I replied. He looked at me then, really looked, and something shifted. The guarded expression cracked, just enough to reveal exhaustion underneath. "I don't know how to act anymore," he admitted. "Around you." My pulse spiked. "Then maybe you shouldn't." The words came out sharper than I meant them to. He flinched. That did it. Guilt hit me immediately. "That's not what I stopped, rubbing my temples. "This situation isn't fair to either of us." "Then why does it feel like we're pretending it doesn't exist?" he asked quietly. There it was, the thing we'd been circling for weeks. I stood abruptly, needing space, needing air. "This conversation isn't a good idea. Neither is ignoring it." His voice wasn't confrontational. It was tired, honest. I paced the room, heart pounding. Every instinct told me to shut this down, to retreat, to protect what little stability remained. But another part of me, one I didn't recognize anymore, wanted answers. "What exactly do you think this is?" I asked, turning to face him. He hesitated. For a moment, I thought he wouldn't answer. Then he said, confusing. I let out a shaky breath. "That's not an answer. It's the only honest one I have." He stood now too, closing the distance between us without touching me. The air felt charged, thick with everything unsaid. "I never meant for this," he continued. "I tried to keep my distance. I still am." "Then why are you standing here?" I asked. He swallowed. "Because pretending nothing's happening feels worse." That was the moment everything tipped. Not because of what he did, but because of what neither of us did next. We stood there, suspended. Close enough to feel each other's presence, far enough to still turn away. I could hear my own heartbeat, loud and erratic. This was the edge. I thought of all the reasons this couldn't happen. All the consequences waiting on the other side of impulse. The guilt that would follow us both like a shadow. And yet, I didn't move. Neither did he. "I should leave," he said finally. "Yes." I agreed. But he didn't. The clock ticked. 1 second. Then another. "I don't trust myself around you," he admitted. The confession landed harder than anything else could have. "Then you should," I said, my voice barely above a whisper. His eyes searched mine, like he was looking for permission I refused to give, and couldn't deny wanting. "I just need you to tell me something," he said. "Anything." My throat tightened. Tell him what? That I felt it too. That loneliness had carved out a hollow space inside me he'd unknowingly stepped into. Or tell him the truth, that even acknowledging this could destroy everything. "I can't," I said. He nodded slowly. Disappointed. Relieved. Both. "That's probably for the best." He stepped back. The space between us felt heavier than the closeness ever had. "I'm going to my room," he said. I watched him walk away, every step echoing like a final warning. At his door, he paused. Didn't turn around. "Good night," he said. "Good night," I replied. The door closed. I stood alone in the living room, legs trembling, mind racing with what-ifs and almosts. Nothing had happened, and yet, everything had. Because now it was real. Spoken. Acknowledged. The tension hadn't been released, it had been sealed, waiting. And as I turned off the lights and walked to my room, one thought refused to let me rest. Was this restraint, or just the calm before something worse? If you want, I can continue with falling action, aftermath, emotional consequences, strained distance, a darker psychological turn, or a slow burn continuation that keeps everything ambiguous. Just say the word. Every sound in the house seemed measured now. Doors closed softly, footsteps paused before entering shared spaces. Even the air felt different, like it had learned to hold secrets. We avoided each other at first. Meals happened at separate times. Lights turned off earlier than usual. When we did cross paths, it was brief, polite nods, neutral expressions, conversations stripped of anything personal. Distance became a performance. But distance doesn't erase awareness. It sharpens it. I found myself listening for him without meaning to. The soft click of his door opening. The low murmur of his voice on late-night calls. The way he lingered in rooms after I'd left, as if checking whether the space still carried my presence. Guilt settled in slowly, not the explosive kind, just a constant pressure behind my ribs. I told myself I'd done the right thing. That restraint was proof of control. Of maturity. Then why did it feel like loss? One evening, I noticed something small that shouldn't have mattered. The spare jacket by the door, gone. I stared at the empty hook longer than necessary, a strange hollowness creeping in. Had he gone out? Was he planning to stay somewhere else? The thought unsettled me more than it should have. Later that night, I heard him in the kitchen. I almost turned back, choosing avoidance over confrontation. Almost. He was standing at the counter, back to me, staring into nothing. When he noticed me, he straightened too quickly. "Oh," he said. Hey. The silence returned, thicker than before. "I'm heading out tomorrow," he said casually, like he was commenting on the weather. "Out?" I asked, immediately wishing I hadn't. "Just staying with a friend for a bit." A pause. "I think it's better." "Better? For who?" I nodded, pretending my chest hadn't tightened. "Yeah, probably." He waited, like he expected me to say more. I didn't. He turned back to the counter, fingers gripping the edge, knuckles pale. I noticed the tension and hated that I noticed. "I don't want you to think I'm running," he said quietly. "I don't," I replied. Another half-truth. "It's just," he exhaled slowly. "I need space to sort things out." I leaned against the doorway, grounding myself. "That makes sense." He finally looked at me then. His expression was unreadable, guarded, conflicted. "Does it?" he asked. I hesitated. "Yes," I said. "Even if it's hard." The word slipped out before I could stop it. "Hard." He caught it. His gaze softened just a fraction. "It is." The air between us felt fragile. Like one wrong word could shatter everything we'd barely managed to hold together. "I don't regret talking," he said after a moment. "Even if nothing came of it." My throat tightened. "Neither do I." That was the most honest thing I'd said all week. He nodded, accepting it without pushing further. Then he picked up his keys, the metallic jingle echoing too loudly in the quiet kitchen. "I'll see you around," he said. "Not soon. Not later. Just around." "Yeah," I replied. "Be safe." He hesitated at the door, hand on the handle. For a brief, dangerous second, I thought he might turn back. Say something reckless. Ask a question neither of us wanted answered. He didn't. The door closed behind him with a soft click that sounded final in a way I wasn't prepared for. I stood there long after, staring at the empty space he'd occupied. Nothing had happened, and yet, everything had changed. The house felt larger again. Quieter. Colder. That night, lying awake in bed, I replayed the moments we'd shared, the glances, the pauses, the things left unsaid. wondering whether distance would dull them or sharpen them further. Because unresolved tension doesn't disappear. It waits. And as sleep finally claimed me, one unsettling thought lingered in the dark. Was this the end of something dangerous, or just the beginning of something neither of us could walk away from? If you want, I can write the conclusion, cliffhanger, final, unresolved turn, a darker ending or a slow burn continuation. Or revise this section to make it more psychological thriller leaning. Just tell me how you'd like to proceed. The house felt heavier that night, as if the walls themselves were holding their breath. I lingered in my room long after he had gone, the faint scent of him still clinging to the sheets, mingling with my own lingering doubts. Every creak of the floorboards downstairs made my heart jump, a reminder that life outside this room continued, unaware of what had happened, or perhaps deliberately ignoring it. I replayed the moment over and over, each detail sharper in my mind, the tilt of his head, the way his eyes hesitated, the quick pulse I could almost feel against my own skin. Was it desire, confusion, or something darker that I didn't yet have the courage to name? The uncertainty gnawed at me, a quiet ache that refused to fade. I tried to focus on the mundane, the ticking of the clock, the hum of the refrigerator, the rustle of the curtains in the faint wind outside. But even these ordinary sounds carried a new tension, like they were somehow complicit in what had happened. My reflection in the mirror startled me, tired eyes, flushed cheeks, a guilty awareness of a line crossed that could never be uncrossed. I heard a soft knock on my door. My breath caught. Was it him? My voice faltered. Who is it? Just me, came the hesitant reply, and the sound of his footsteps approaching made the air between us taut. There was no malice in his tone, only uncertainty, mirroring the chaos inside me. I wanted to say something, anything, to break the silence, but the words stuck. He didn't enter, only lingered in the doorway, his presence a weight I could neither ignore nor confront. We were both suspended in that fragile moment, caught between curiosity and restraint, desire and guilt. I wondered how long we could stay like this before everything became impossible to hide. As he finally left, the door clicking softly behind him, I realized the tension hadn't diminished, it had only deepened. The air was thick with unspoken questions. Would we ever speak of it? Pretend it hadn't happened? Or was this the beginning of a dangerous, inevitable unraveling? I curled up on the bed, pulling the blankets close, trying to anchor myself in the familiar. But nothing felt familiar anymore. Every shadow seemed loaded with meaning, every sound a whisper of temptation or warning. My thoughts circled endlessly. What if someone else found out? What if he felt differently now? What if I could never feel the same again? Outside, the wind picked up, rattling the window pane. And for a brief, shivering moment, I thought I heard a soft laugh, his laugh, carrying through the dark, playful yet unplaceable, a reminder that this story was far from over. The night stretched on, and I lay there, tangled in questions I had no answers for. Somewhere beyond the walls of my room, life continued, oblivious, or perhaps complicit. And in that uncertain silence, I knew one thing for certain, nothing would ever feel the same again. If you want, I can compile the full 4,000-word script for you next, stitching together all the sections, introduction, rising action, climax, falling action, conclusion, into a cohesive, suspenseful narrative ready for a faceless video. Do you want me to do that? The rain had been falling steadily all evening, drumming softly against the roof like a quiet warning. I sat on the edge of my bed, the thin glow of my desk lamp casting long shadows across the room. Everything smelled faintly of detergent and damp wood, familiar yet strange, as if the house itself was holding its breath. Outside, the streetlights flickered in the puddles on the asphalt, blurred halos that mirrored the haze in my mind. It had been one of those ordinary nights when nothing ever seemed to happen, until it did. My stepson, Alex, had come home late from his friend's house, his laughter echoing down the hallway before it abruptly stopped. I remember thinking how much he had grown, how tall he'd gotten in the past few months. There was a strange tension in his presence tonight, something that didn't belong to the routine of shared meals or casual greetings. I shrugged off the feeling and began changing into something more comfortable. My reflection in the mirror caught me off guard, eyes wide, pulse racing, a fleeting sense of anticipation I couldn't name. The soft rustle of fabric, the creak of the floorboard outside my door, made my skin prickle. My mind raced, trying to convince myself it was nothing, that I was imagining things. But deep down, a small voice whispered otherwise. Then came a knock, light, tentative, almost hesitant. I froze, unsure if I should answer. "It's me," came his voice, soft and uncertain, yet somehow different than usual. My heart skipped. Something about the way he said it, a mixture of familiarity and hesitation, sent a jolt through me. I turned slowly, meeting his eyes in the doorway. They were wide, slightly nervous, but also searching. For what? I couldn't tell. And in that instant, the ordinary, predictable world I had known felt fragile, as if it could shatter with a single misstep. The room smelled faintly of him, soap, aftershave, and something indefinable that stirred something forbidden inside me. I told myself to step back, to ignore the tension coiling between us. Yet every instinct, every nerve ending, seemed to demand I stay. My hands shook slightly as I adjusted the hem of my shirt, trying to appear casual while my mind raced with questions I couldn't answer. Something was about to happen. I could feel it, like the static before a storm. A part of me wanted to retreat, to lock the door and pretend the night had been ordinary. But another, darker part of me, the part one rarely acknowledged, wanted to see where this tension would lead. And as the rain tapped insistently against the window, I realized I wasn't sure who held the power in this delicate, dangerous moment, him, me, or the fragile silence that stretched between us, threatening to crack. If you want, I can continue with the rising action next, 1,200–1,500 words, gradually escalating the tension and introducing the main conflict with vivid imagery and emotional stakes. Do you want me to do that?